Now that we understand more about stored procedures, we're now going to look at how we can use serverless SQL pool to transform CSV data into Parquet format and also keep the partition column intact with the help of stored procedures. Let's start by defining the problem. As we've seen, the ctask statement takes data from all of the partitions in our bronze layer and transforms that data to Parquet format. But it writes all of the Parquet files in one folder rather than creating partitions for each of the subfolders. Also, it creates an external table that's pointing to the Parquet files, even though this gives us the data in Parquet format. It's not efficient to read this data as the data is not partitioned and we don't have the ability to prune partitions. Instead, what we really need is for a process to take all of the data in partitions and create a similar partition structure for the Parquet files and clear a view that gives us the ability to prune the partitions. As I said, there isn't a single statement in Synapse Serverless SQL that provides this capability at the moment, but we can apply the learnings from so far and achieve this. Let me take you through how to do that. What we can do is instead of one ctask statement, we can use one ctask for each of the partitions so that it picks up the data from a specific partition and creates corresponding files in an appropriate partition. This is great, but there are two problems with it. Firstly, we need as many ctask statements as the number of partitions, which can be too many to write. Secondly, each of the ctas to statement will create a separate external table, but we don't want them. Instead, we want one view for the entire folder so that we can query all of the data and prune partitions by using a where clause. This is where stored procedures can help. As you know, we can write reusable code using stored procedures. We can write a store procedure to accept the input parameters of the partition columns year and month and perform ctask operations for the provided year and month. We can then call this stored procedure with the required parameters in a loop. We will execute the stored procedure using the exact command in this session. But this can be done using Synapse pipelines in production scenarios. I'll demonstrate that in a later session. The execution of the ctask statement from the stored procedure will also create the external tables as we know, but we don't need them. In order to stop that from happening, we can include a drop statement in our stored procedure. So the unwanted tables are dropped, but the data in the data lake remains as is. We can then create a view on the main folder with the partition columns so that we can query the entire data and also prune the partitions by specifying year and month in the backlog. So this is basically our solution. We got what we wanted, which is to have all of our Parquet files in partitioned folders and also one view which is sat on top of the main folder, and we can prune the partitions using the where clause. As I said before, it's just a workaround, but it works perfectly fine. I would still encourage to use Spark Pool instead of this solution. If you are able to use Spark Pools, let us now summarize what we need to do before creating the solution in Synapse Studio. Firstly, we need to create the stored procedure to accept the partition column as inputs. The stored procedure uses the ctask statement to transform the data for the specific partition from CSV to Parquet and create the external table. Then have to drop the external table for the specific partition as it's not required. Once stored procedure is created, we need to execute this stored procedure for each of the partitions. We will hardcore the partition values in this section of the course. But I'll show you how to get the values from the input data and dynamically pass them to the stored procedure via Synapse pipelines in another lesson. And finally, we need to create a view for the entire data and also include the partition columns so that we can prune the partitions. Hope you now have a good understanding of the solution. Let's get started with creating the stored procedure in the next session.